Planetu Zemi jsme stále ještě dokonale neprozkoumali. Tu a tam se stále mohou najít kmeny, které třeba někde v pralesech ještě vůbec neví o zbytku světa. Když se takový kmen najde, máme se snažit ho civilizovat, anebo se snažit zachovat jeho tradiční způsoby života. To je tématem dnešního podcastu Blesku. U jeho sledování a poslechu vás vítá Martin Valeš. A mým dnešním hostem je německá spisovatelka Sabine Kueglerová, která právě s jedním takovým pralesním kmenem v Indonésii vyrůstala. Welcome, Sabine, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, to start, how did it happen that you grew up with a Stone Age level tribe?
So, my parents are linguists, and before I was born, they left Germany. This is in the 60s, and they moved to Nepal. So I was actually born in the Himalayan mountains. And we lived there for about 3 years when my parents studied a language up in the Terai plain, which is on the border to India. And when I was 3 years old, we had to leave because of political problems that were going on there at the time. And we returned to Germany. And about a year and a half later, my parents got a new offer to work in West Papua, Indonesia, which at the time was Irian Jaya, now it's known as West Papua, which is the west side of the island of New Guinea, which is north of Australia, for those who don't know where the island of New Guinea is, Papua New Guinea. So that's how I came to live in West Papua, Indonesia.
And so you started living with the recently discovered tribe.
Yeah. Yes, well, not right away. When the interesting thing is when the day that we left Germany, which was April something 1978, on the same day we left Germany, a new tribe was discovered in the jungle in an area which they nicknamed the Lost Valley because it is an area which is still unexplored to this day. And at the end of the valley, an American was working in one of the other tribes, and he suddenly saw these men come out of the jungle, and they looked so wild. And so he was able to write down some words in phonetic language, and they compared it to all the other languages which were already known and realized it was an unknown language, which then means it's an unknown tribe. So my father was actually asked to go in and look for this tribe. That was 1978, yes.
And he decided that you will live all the family with them.
Yes. So it's a very, very exciting story how he found them, because you have to imagine he knew nothing. He didn't know where they were exactly, how many there were, what was their condition. The only thing he knew was that they were 2 to 3 days west from the location of where they were first spotted, and that they were, and he had like 2 or 3 words written down in phonetic. He had nothing else to go on. And at that time, we didn't have phones and satellite phones and all this. So he went there and there was no map either. So the map that he got was like white because it was unexplored. So he actually had to do his own map, and he went in there, and it took him on a second expedition. He was able to have get into contact with them. And then, yes, he decided to move there with us.
And how did the tribe accept you?
Well, they had... When they were first discovered, my father first had contact with them, they had no idea that an outside world existed. They did not know that they were living in a country. They did not know that there was people who had white skin. But what is interesting is they don't see us as white. They see us as colorless. And they once told us that for them, we look like a corpse that's been in the water too long, which of course, we look at ourselves and we think we look very nice. They look at us and think we don't look very nice. So they were very fascinated when we first came in. And yes, they were excited. I mean, they were excited to have us there, and they took us in very quickly.
What about the language? How did you communicate?
So my father stayed there 8 months before we moved in, because especially when you go into a tribe or a culture that's been unexplored or nobody knows anything about, it's very important to learn if there are any taboos, which means is there anything you are not allowed to do? What are the rules? What traditions do they have? So my father went in for about 8 months to learn the language as much as he could at the time, and also to learn a bit about their culture to make sure we don't make any mistakes, because that can be dangerous if you break a rule, which for them is very serious. So my father learned it first. Then we children, my family, my brother, my sister, my mother, and I, we joined him.
Sorry, you were what age about?
I had just turned 7. So I'd been living a year prior to that. So we moved to Indonesia when I was 5. Then we moved to a jungle base where we spent about a year and a half. And then we moved to the Fayu. So I had just turned 7 when we moved in. I have an older sister, Judith, and a younger brother, Christian. So we moved in, and it was really interesting because when we came in, we noticed that the children never played. They always sat either against a tree or by their parents. And so we kids thought, well, we just leave them be, and after a while they'll come to us, because children were terrified of us. I mean, especially the small children, they would just scream when they saw us, because obviously, you imagine all of a sudden you see someone who's colorless with these strange blue eyes or green eyes and blonde hair. It terrified them. So in the beginning, they were frightened of us, but over time, they began to, they would watch us play, and we would always invite them to come play. And eventually they did. And it was one young boy. His name was Tuare. He's the one who began to play with us. And then the other children came. So we learned the language just by playing, which is a fabulous way to learn a language. Mm-hmm. And children learn languages very quickly.
So can you tell us something?
Okay. So the Fayu language is a tonal language. It has 5 tones. So high, medium, low, high to medium, medium to low. For example, you have the word D. You have D, 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 which means tongue, hair, neck, water, and knife. So you get the tone wrong. Mm-hmm. You get the whole meaning of what you want to say wrong, which happened to us a few times, which thankfully always was more funny than serious. But so you tell them, please bring me a knife, and then they would bring me water. So I'm like, okay, I got the wrong tone. So that was the Fayu language. And it was a simple language, because the language itself was, even though it was tonal, was a language which you say it was a dying language. It's coming back now, but at the time, because the Fayu were a dying culture, the language was also dying, which is a very interesting concept in linguistics. Depending on how advanced the culture is, then you have very advanced language. Mm-hmm. So there weren't that many words to learn. The tone, of course, you had to learn. There weren't so many words to learn. So they would have, for example, words that had several meanings. They would just put all meanings into like one word. And so that was something that made it a bit easier. And so we learned it fairly quickly when we were kids.
So just a few sentences and...
Yeah.
And showing.
Yes. And another interesting aspect of the language is they don't say me. They say Sabine Kueglerová. That means I'm angry. Mm-hmm. So they speak about themselves in third person, not in me or I. And that has to do with the tribal system, where people in a tribal system don't have their own identity. It's a group mm-hmm. Culture. So the Fayu went as far as not even seeing themselves as a person, as me, I. It was always the name, and then I'm like Sabine's hungry or Sabine's angry. Well,
that's actually what we see in the American Indians, right? Winnetou and so on.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I never thought of that. You're right. I never even thought of that. You're right. Yes.
And so, can you show us a sentence or two? Or is it a sentence?
So
is 2
ago.
words?
Yeah. No, it's very. It's for example, like Sabine Kueglerová, which means I'm bad, but it also means I'm angry or I'm upset. Mm-hmm. Sabine awaru kaha. That means I'm doing well, I'm happy, I'm doing good. My favorite word was asahego, because asahego means everything that you don't have a word for. Hello, goodbye, because they didn't have a word for I'm sorry. So it was, I'm sorry, how are you? It just was, all the words that just were lost was mm-hmm. just put into the word asahego. It also meant something good. Like if you wish for something good, you'd say, Sabine asahego. That means I'm wishing for something good, something beautiful. because all those words were lost. So that was a very, very practical word to use. And based upon how you used it, then you just sort of guess what the meaning is behind it, which is practical. Someone says, I love you or I hate you, and you can just interpret with I love you.
Oh, is it so?
So that was very practical.
You have to think a lot then.
Yeah. So you have to watch their mimics, their gestures. You have to watch how they look, how they feel. And having grown up there, because I was trained to be a hunter as a child, which is a very unique story in itself, I learned to sense and feel things other people normally don't sense and feel. So I can feel a person's emotions and thoughts and things like that. So when I was a child, because I could feel that, I knew what they meant. So it was 50% spoken language, 50% the unspoken, or the senses or the feeling that you get from them.
You said you were trained a hunter. Would it be a role for a girl?
Well, no, it was actually forbidden. It was a very unique case, and today I understand why women are not trained to hunt in the jungle. The tribal culture is a very unique culture, which is developed over hundreds of thousands of years. And so they developed a way to survive, because we humans, it doesn't matter where we live, our instincts are to survive, and we develop very quickly wherever we are. For example, my children have a different setup or a different coding. I call it like a coding or programming than I do, because they grew up here in the West. I grew up in the jungle, so my coding or I was programmed to survive in the jungle, not to survive in a city. So generally, in every culture I've been in, women are not allowed to hunt. But when I was a child and I came in, I didn't run around naked, because the tribal people did, but I didn't. So I always had on shorts. And my father had mentioned to them that I was a girl. But I was a tomboy, so I always wanted to go hunting. I could run faster than the boys. I could climb trees faster. And I always followed the boys around and the men for hunting, for, anything that was active I loved. And they would always push me back to the woman, and I always came back to the men. So after a while, they thought that maybe they had misunderstood my father and I was a boy, and they didn't know what to do. This was a new situation for them. So what they decided to do eventually is they decided to train me as a hunter. And then when I got older and I began to develop, they would be able to tell, am I a girl or a boy? So I never told this to my parents, because they would not have been in agreement with it, but they began to train me to hunt. And they said to me, you have to see without your eyes, hear without your ears, smell without your nose. Everything you have to sense. You have to be able to move you have to develop your other senses. And I didn't understand it at the time, and develop your touch too. So then they started the training, and they trained me to hunt, develop the senses, then bow and arrow. But by the time I got to my advanced lesson, I was older. They saw I was a girl, and they threw me from one day to the next, threw me out of the men's world. And that was for me about the time where I began to really struggle, because I had what you call the hunting adrenaline in me already. They train you to develop an adrenaline. It's addictive. Because if you don't have that, you would never go hunting. It is brutal to go hunting in the jungle, really brutal. So if you don't have if you don't have that addiction for it, because you want to feel this adrenaline, you go onto an incredible high, and you want it again and again. So that's what keeps the men to go back to hunt. But now you have someone who's developed this adrenaline, but there's no way to release it. There's no way to get it. And that caused a lot of difficulty in most of my life. So now I know.
Since puberty, right?
Yeah, since puberty.
It must have been a brutal combination then.
Yeah. But honestly, I didn't understand it until I actually went back. I never understood what it was. So I thought there was something wrong with me. I never understood until several years ago. I actually went back hunting, and that's when I understood what was happening, because there was no one to explain it. There was no one there who could explain these things to me. So as a child, I was very wild. Yeah, very wild. Yeah.
So you still have the senses?
Yeah, I do. And yeah, I still have them. When I'm here, I try to block them off a bit, but it's like, I explain it like having a second pair of eyes, and I try to keep them shut most of the time. So because it's very overwhelming for me when I'm with many people, sometimes it gets very overwhelming. So my senses just go into overdrive, which is sometimes a problem. But yeah, I do. I don't think you lose it. I don't think you do.
So when you were talking about the reasons why women don't hunt.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, okay. According to the men, they say, if women learned to hunt, they would destroy manhood. Because they say that women, according to many, women are considered intellectually higher than men. They are the emotional beings. Men are the physical beings, women are the emotional beings. Now, if you teach, everyone has their place in the structure of a tribe. If you imagine it, it's like a structure. The men are responsible for the outer structures, which provide safety, food, shelter, and children. The women are in the inside of the structure because they are responsible for, gathering food. But mainly they're responsible for raising children, because without raising children, there is no future for the tribe. So women are considered emotional beings and intellectual beings. So they said if you teach women to hunt and they develop these instincts and adrenaline, they would get too powerful and it would cause an imbalance within the tribe. Just like men don't do women's work either. So everything is about balance in life, in the jungle, in nature, in cultures, with people. Everything is about balance. So teaching women how to hunt would upset this balance, which kept them going.
But then you came and
then I think it was also a bit of an exception because I was from outside. But there are situations like when I was an adult where I would meet tribal people and the men pick that up very quickly and it irritates them. It irritates them. They don't like it. So
that you are in like
no, that they
powerful, independent, or
no, that they sense, they can sense it. They can sense that the adrenaline. They can sense it, yeah. So I've had one man who was actually very educated, but he was really shocked, and he was very angry, and he said, "You shouldn't have learned this." But it's fine, it's a different world. I mean, imagine life in the jungle, like, is about as opposite as you can imagine from here, in many, many ways. So. And the Fayu, on top of that, not only were they still living on the level of a Stone Age development, meaning they had no tools except stone. As a knife, they had a bamboo. So they had no tools, as we know it. And they were a dying culture also. So they had a very simple way of living. They didn't wear clothes. They hunted with bow and arrow. They were in a terrible, terrible war situation, which is also the reason why they were a dying culture, because like everything in life, if you isolate it, it dies. Mm-hmm. And humans too. If you isolate a group of people, eventually they will either turn on each other or they will die out. So with the Fayu having had no input from any outside, they were totally isolated. They eventually, for some reason, which we don't know, turned against each other, split up into 4 groups. And within 2 generations, they had slaughtered each other from several thousand members to 400 men, women, and children. Mm-hmm. So 100 people per group. And not only were they in war with each other, they were also in war with the tribes around them. And they were so famous, or they were so feared because of their brutality, that the tribes that had contact with the outside world didn't even mention them, because they were so afraid of them. So it was a difficult situation when we came in. Now, we were never in danger. People always think you go into a tribe and you'll be attacked. You won't. As long as you don't break the rules, as long as you don't do something which is absolutely forbidden, they will not harm you. On the contrary, they were very, very fond of us and eventually considered us part of their tribe, yeah.
So when you say those rules and taboos, can you give us an example?
Yes, you don't sleep with someone else's woman. You don't kill someone else's pig. Although I don't think they'd kill you if you did that. You don't steal. The only punishment the Fayu had was a death penalty. So anything you do, you're dead. So, obviously we're not going to steal a pig. We're not going to sleep around. There were ways where they could settle, disputes, but it was generally when it came to survival. Like you don't like sleep with another woman. You can steal her, meaning you can steal her and marry her, but you can't sleep with her. You can't have a relationship with her. Sexual relationships are very, very strictly guarded there. Mm-hmm. So you can't do that. You can't, the wild pigs are considered very valuable. So that also you can't kill, you can't steal from someone else. And obviously if you attack someone else, they will kill you. Yeah. So these are things that we obviously wouldn't have done. So the Fayu were good. There are other ones that are like, I know of other tribes where it's much more complicated. So we were, pretty lucky that the Fayu the rules were very simple to follow.
As to their isolation, I suppose there was some research afterwards. So are they related to their neighbors or are they a unique tribe?
This is so interesting about the island of New Guinea. And this is why, for example, for a linguist, it's like, it's a treasure trove. Because you have the phenomena that you have tribes living right next to each other and their language is completely different. Completely. You have the Fayu tribe, which was a tonal language. You have the Kirikiri tribe, which was completely different. Then you have the Do tribe, which is also completely different. And then all the way down, you have these tribes. Their languages are oftentimes not even related to each other. They are also, I noticed, for example, the Fayu had a different, for someone from the outside, they all look the same. But if you know them, you begin to recognize, oh, they're from this tribe, they're from this tribe. For example, the Bauzi tribe were very tall people. The next tribe to them were very small people. Why that is, I don't know. I know there's anthropologists that have studied this, but they're all of the Melanesian race, so to say. They have the curly hair and the dark skin. Yeah, at least in the area where we were.
He also wrote that they basically did not know love. How so?
Well, they don't. In tribal cultures, generally, even with the Fayu, with other ones, there is no such thing as romance. I remember trying to explain it to some of the women, and they thought it was so funny. It was incomprehensible for them. Like, why would I, have feelings for my husband? He's only there to provide whatever. Their feelings that they have in terms of like emotional attachment and love, they get from their best friend. So physical love or whatever you get from the husband, but all your emotional needs are covered by your best friend. So when they marry, they don't marry because they're in love or because, they think, I want to be with this person the rest of my life. It's more just out of survival. Men are attractive if they're good warriors, if they're tall, if they're strong, depending on what position they have in the tribe. And a woman is attractive not because of her physicalness, but more because she can bear lots of kids, meaning wide hips, tall. They do like tall women. And also if she's good at gathering food or making sago. So that's sort of how they rate attractiveness. And yeah, so they don't generally marry out of love. It's changing though. I mean, I do know of a case now with the Fayu where we've had that case. Yeah, it comes up, but very, very seldom.
Well, actually, if their language is so simple, do they talk much?
Oh, all the time. Nonstop. I don't know how they do it. There's nothing to do there otherwise. I mean, there's no technology there. There's nothing to do. So you sit all day and you talk. And the interesting thing is that even with the Fayu, we didn't really come across depression, mental issues, trauma, nothing. Because they talk about everything and they have no secrets. There's no concept of lying or secrets, because when you grow up with such a small group of people and everyone knows everything, you don't have secrets. You don't lie. They do not lie. And I remember that used to really bug me as a child, because there was a rule that my parents set up that we were not allowed to eat meat that we didn't see before they slaughtered it, because they were cannibals. So just out of safety reasons. But of course, the way I was in the, with the Fayu somewhere, and they gave me a piece of meat to eat, and I hadn't seen what it was. So I said to the Fayu, don't tell, my dad that I'm eating this. Keep it a secret. And they all stood there watching me, and they said, yes, yes. And they watched me eat it. And the second I ate it, they turned around and they ran to my father saying, Sabine ate meat, because they cannot hold a secret. So I got into trouble and I learned that they cannot. So there's no secrets among them. And when they talk about something, they talk about it over and over and over and over and over again. But this is, so on one hand, the physicalness of their life is brutal. They, for example, they did not believe a human could die of natural causes. They thought you either died from an arrow or from a curse. So if someone got sick or was bitten by a snake and died, oh, it must be a curse. And for that reason, when someone was hurt or had an infection, they didn't treat it. They didn't even make an effort to help that person. Or someone would be laying in a hut half dead. They would just ignore them. Because what can we do? It's a curse. But if someone is emotionally hurt, like someone dies or someone's sad, they all come. And they sit and they talk with you and they bring you food and they take care of you no matter how long it takes until you're okay again. Mm-hmm. So that was a very unique aspect of the culture. And that's why we didn't have issues like depression and all that.
So what was your parents and your family main goal there?
Well, my parents obviously were there to learn the language. It's like to preserve it, but they were also missionaries. My parents were also missionaries. So, but their job was linguists. So what they did is they both my parents are linguists. You learn a language. It's very hard because there's no one there to teach you. You don't know the grammar of it. I mean, it took them a long time to figure out how many tones there were in that language. It was my mom who figured it out. She would record it and she would listen to it. And that's how she was able to identify how many sounds there was in their language. Mm-hmm. Then you have to identify how it's used. And then you have to find words where, for example, you can't see, like what's the word for dreaming? I still remember when my mom found that out, she was so excited. She found out the word for dream. Mm-hmm. And once you know the language pretty much, then you have to start setting up a grammar. You have to decide how are you going to write it. And to do this for one language, it's a lifetime work. So then later on, other experts come in, and this way you preserve the language and you keep it from dying out.
So when you say missionaries, they were trying to turn them to Christianity?
Well, my parents had a very different view on that. My father always used to say, religion comes from man, belief comes from God. They obviously believed in God because I think, it's crazy to go into an area like that without believing in something, I guess. So they did believe in God, but they always said that they always said it has to come from the heart. And I remember in the beginning that Fayu knew that we believed in a God because in their belief system, which was also dying out, there was only an evil spirit. There was no good. There was nothing good. There was nothing to balance it out. All tribal people are spiritual beings. All of them are spiritual. It doesn't matter what they believe. But this case was unique because they did not even consider that could be something good. So anything bad that happened, if there was lightning, a storm, earthquake, it was the evil spirit. So they asked my father, and he said, we also believe that there's a good spirit. And that really fascinated them. And they would come and say, can you tell us? But my father said, I don't know your language well enough. So my parents were very careful in that. They didn't come in, which a lot of missionaries did. They would come in and the first thing they do was build a church. My parents never did that. And they said, we're here to bring a message of peace. And obviously they did later on a bit more. But they always said it has to come from them. And they would always wait for them to come and ask them. And my father always said, you have to live what you believe. You can't tell someone forgive and not forgive yourself. You can't say, do love each other and not do it yourself. So my parents always believed that the translating the Bible or the Bible starts with your life and the way you live, not the words you put down on a piece of paper.
So they mainly try to lead by example?
Yes, very much. Yeah. Which was unique.
And it worked from what I read?
Yes. Well, it was quite interesting because there were several situations that we came across where we would have had the right to kill one of them. Once the chief's son stole a piece of meat. And so my father I actually went with him at the time, and my father and I went to the chief's hut or house. And before my father left, my mom said, go and tell him it's okay and give the young boy a piece of meat to let him know we're not going to kill him. So my father went to the chief's house, and you could tell that Chief Bao his name was Chief Bao, was very, very scared because he thought, this is it, I'm going to lose my son. And he only had this one son. So my father said, can you call out your son? And so he was a teenager at the time. He came and he was like shaking. He was shaking. He was so afraid. So my father went to him and put his arms around him and said, listen, I know you stole the meat, because he'd stolen and then quickly put it back. But he said, I know you stole the meat, but to let you know that I'm not angry with you, I'm going to give you another piece of meat on top. And that shocked them. That was something they couldn't comprehend. And Chief Bao was at the time the most dangerous warrior. I mean, he had done many things, which I don't really write about in my first book, but he had done some really brutal stuff. He'd killed a lot of people. So for him, it was a total new concept. Here's a man who could kill my son, but instead he gives something on top of it. And it took many years, but that concept just changed. And there were people they stole from us out of our house. There was quite a number of things that happened over the years, but my parents always said, we love them and we forgive them in that sense. For us, it wasn't such a big thing, but for them it is. So that made a very, very big, that had a big impact, more than, putting up rules, more than trying to change them with words or trying to put some belief system on them. Living by example has a much better and much, much bigger impact and more effective impact than trying to teach someone something.
So then at age of 17, you left for Europe. It must have been difficult for you.
Well, it was because there were several reasons why I left. One of them being I had been obviously kicked out of the man's world. I didn't adjust into the woman's world very well because I hadn't learned the woman's ways, and I found it boring and uninteresting. And so I had never really did it. My sister went into the woman's world, so she was fine, but I struggled. And then there were a number of things that happened. For example, I began to discover like magazines, and I had been to the Western world. I had been to Germany. I had seen it, but it was always for like visits. So it wasn't like I'd never seen it. But it's a very big difference when you visit an area than when you have to integrate. And when we visited, my parents were obsessive with keeping us isolated, which in my hindsight, I don't think was a very smart move on their part. They were very much into, we couldn't watch television. We couldn't do this. We couldn't do that. And we were never, obviously I don't think they realized themselves what impact this would have on us. So when I was 17, I had an uncle in Berlin, and he said, she needs to be civilized. If we don't bring her here and civilize her, she's never going to adapt. Of course, at 17, it's like a month before my 18th birthday, so I was almost 18. That's quite late to get someone to adapt. And he offered to send me to a Swiss finishing school in Switzerland. And by that time, I was beginning to wonder that maybe I didn't belong with the Fayu tribe, because it was around 16 when I became aware that I had a different skin color. I was so integrated into their world and their culture, I never realized that I could be different. So I became aware of it when the girls started getting married. Like Fayu girls get married at 14, 15, 16. So all the girls and guys were married. And then my father, decided to ask he asked the Fayu once, would you ever, would you ever steal, which is a word for marriage in Fayu, would you ever steal one of my daughters? And they laughed. And they're like, no, no. For them, we are not attractive because we can't make sago. And of course, I always wanted to go hunting. So
sorry, what's
sago? Not attractive for them. Yeah.
Sago is? You cannot make what?
Sago. Sago is the staple food of what they eat. It's made from the inside of a palm tree. And they mix it with water and they turn it into like a clump, which they put into the fire, and they eat the crust of it. It's like the equivalent to our bread here is sago for them. Okay. Sorry. So, yeah. So I began to think about maybe I did belong to to my parents' tribe, so to say. Maybe there was a world out there which was waiting for me. And the only concept I had of the world outside was, of course, the short visits we had, which were always very nice. You see grandma, you get nice things. But on top of that, I had built this imaginary world inside my head, which was very much pushed by my mother. For example, when on the rainy days we didn't have anything to do, she would tell us stories of Germany. But obviously she told us the nice stories, about strawberries and ice cream and all these amazing things. And I began to fantasize that there was a world out there where people would walk along these clean road streets, all dressed in colorful clothes, everyone smiling at each other, eating everything they wanted, as much ice cream as they wanted, and they could go into any store and take anything they wanted. Because I didn't understand, I had no real concept of money, that you have to earn money. And then that was no concept for me, because in village life, everything is shared. There is no such thing as not sharing. If you have 2 buckets, you give 1 bucket away. So, and I used to always think that the people in the West must be the happiest people alive, because how can you not be happy with all the amazing luxuries we have here? From hot running water to electricity 24 hours a day, to restaurants with the most delicious foods, with clothes, we have an incredible world here if you think about it. So I always thought, the people must be so happy. And when I came at the age of 17, I flew to Hamburg. And from Hamburg, I was supposed to take the night train down to Switzerland. I came to Hamburg and I was brought to the train station. It was at nighttime. It was October. And for some reason, I don't know why, I was like, someone gave me a ticket and they said, okay, here's your ticket. You have to go to the track with this number, to the train with this number, to the wagon with this number, to the seat with this number. Can you manage? And of course, I nodded my head, because in the culture I grew up with, you don't say no. So I nodded my head, totally confused, and then that person just left. So I went to the train station and I stood in front of it in Hamburg. It's a really big train station. And there were like these people laying on the floor, beggars. And I was like, why are there people laying on the floor? I couldn't understand. And I thought, maybe they're just ill. So the people are just letting them die, because that's what I knew. So I went inside and I thought, my first question was, what is a track? Because I knew the English word, but not the German word, because my education was in English. So I went and found a police officer and I said to him, could you tell me what a track is? And he got so angry at me. Now you have to imagine, I just came from the jungle and I can sense everything when I come back. Every emotion, every feeling, every thought. I can sense it like you can see it, but I can sense it. So I could feel his anger. Now, in a tribal system, if you get angry like that, it's dangerous, because there's a possibility he will shoot you. So right away, my fear factor went through the roof, because I'm like, he's really angry. Of course, I knew he wouldn't shoot me, but subconsciously, all my alarm bells went off. So I realized I'd said something wrong, and I corrected myself. I said, could you tell me where track 14 is? Still not knowing what it was. I figured it out very quickly. So he told me where to go. And I went there, and I had never seen a train before. I'd never seen a train like the ICE trains. And I'm standing there looking at this huge area with these tracks and these trains and these noises. And at that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before. And that was fear. And all the years I'd grown up with the tribal war, with the jungle, with nature, with lightning, with malaria, nearly dying of it, boat falling over, everything. I'd never been afraid. And while I stood there in this environment, I felt fear, but I didn't know what it was. And one of the reasons is that I could sense everything around me, every person that walked by me that was in my vicinity. And what I felt weren't the happy people with the colorful clothes. I felt depression, bitterness, anger. And I felt like the same environment that I had when I was in the jungle and the fire were killing each other. And I thought, there's a war here. There's a war. It took me many years to understand it. We don't have a physical war here. We have a mental or emotional war here to a certain extent. Many people are scarred. Many are hurt. And I didn't understand that because it was not the world I'd grown up in. I knew how to protect myself physically, but no one had ever taught me to protect myself emotionally. So I actually, that night, was something that's like one of those moments you never forget. They're so clear in my mind. And I actually made it. I actually got on the wrong train, but finally the right train. And I just thought for sure I was going to die. I thought, this is my end. Tonight I am going to die. But I didn't, obviously.
And you eventually became civilized then?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that. I was very lucky because I went to a very nice boarding school on Lake Geneva in Montreux, and the girls knew I was from the jungle. So obviously they made it their mission to civilize me, but I think their word of civilization meant teaching me how to get dressed, how to put on makeup. I didn't know a bit about that, but they taught me how to go to bars and order drinks. They taught me that it's okay if someone touches you because in tribal system, men don't touch you. Men and women never touch each other unless they're married. So all of a sudden, the guys would come up and they give like the cheek on the right, left, right. And I was so offended. I'm like, oh, he just touched me. I felt like, molested because I didn't know that. So they would teach me things like that. They taught me a lot of stuff, which probably not all of it was good. But so I was still in a very good environment in boarding school because it was very tribal in the sense that we were very isolated and all that. But yeah, they put it to their goal to civilize me.
But you kept returning to the jungle and to other tribes as well?
For many years, I didn't. When I left boarding school, I went into it. I was pregnant. As you see, the girls taught me a bit too much. And I ended up staying because I was too afraid to go back, because in tribal system, there's no such thing as illegitimate children. I was too ashamed. How can I go back to my tribe like this? So I ended up staying in the West, and I went into a terrible, terrible culture shock for many, many years. I went through really hard time. And so it took me many years to go back. And I went back to the Fayu, and then over the years I kept on, every once in a while I'd go back and I began to explore the concept of, cultural differences and ways to help preserve the traditions and culture and environment, but at the same time let them develop in the way they want to develop. Because this whole issue of saying, let's cut them all off, let's, preserve them by not letting them develop, let them continue to live in their huts and run around naked, is actually, I find, very not only degrading, but insulting. Because I remember there was one chief who once told me, he got very angry when I mentioned this, and he said to me, you sleep in soft beds while we sleep on the floor. You wear clothes while we run around naked and get bitten and hurt. And he gave a whole list of like, our women go blind because they have smoke in their eyes 3 times a day when they make a fire, while you guys cook on stoves. You sleep in houses that are protected against the rain while we sleep in huts that are, full of water when it rains. He said, how dare you tell us how to live? And he's right. It's for them to choose. And the only thing we can do is to support them in informing them about certain things, like, the concept of don't cut down all your trees. And teach them ways to earn money and develop. I'm not talking about tribes that are very isolated here. I'm talking about tribes that are already in contact with the outside world. So to find a way for them to have to have these for them it's luxury. For us, it's normal. For them to have all these things without destroying their traditions or without destroying their environment. And that's sort of a project that I've worked on for many years.
Mm-hmm. So your tribe, the Fayu, how is their situation like today?
Well, they haven't, because their area is so isolated, it's so far out, they still have their huts that they used to have, They're growing. Obviously, they're having a lot more kids because of the war. Many of them were dying very young. A woman would have 6 children, and maybe two would survive into adulthood. Now, from 6 children, 5 survive into adulthood. Their diet is much better because they learned how to plant gardens instead of gathering, because there's not much food in the swamps. There's no more war. And they're a growing tribe, and their land is huge. They have a huge piece of land which belongs to them. So they're doing actually quite well. But in terms of like much development, there's not much. But what we did do is that we took the young men, especially the ones that were more intelligent, and we brought them to the capital city of Jaipur to educate them. Because you can't be there forever. They need to learn to protect themselves. They need to learn to protect their own land and to make decisions. They need to learn about the outside world to be ready for one day when it does come, because you can't stop development. We're living in a new age, in a new world.
And how does the government actually treat such tribes?
Well, they treated the Fayu very well, very well. The Fayu are probably one of the most protected tribes in the sense that they, leave them be, which is nice. And it's changed. I mean, there was a time where they did not treat them well. There was a time where it was really bad. But even the Indonesian government has changed their stance towards the local people of West Papua. But there has been a political uprising for many years. A lot of things went wrong in the past. And yeah, so it's better now. It's a lot better. And tribes that live in the isolated areas, nobody goes there really.
What is so special about the Fayu that their treatment?
I think because of the book, you don't want bad publicity. It's one of these interesting things that if you want to protect nowadays, because time has changed, if you want to protect something, you always have to decide: do I go public with it or do I keep it private? And there comes a time or situation where it's better to go public with it, because that way, if something goes wrong, right away it would get into the press, and nobody wants bad press or nobody wants issues. Or, I know of tribes that were just slaughtered. Nobody heard about it to this day. So in that sense, the Fayu do have a protection now. And there's someone working with them, which is good. I haven't been back in a long time, but they're doing good as far as I heard, yeah.
So they own the area?
Yes.
They're like citizens of Indonesia now? Or
yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, well, they're citizens, so they're learning the Indonesian language, at least the young men are. So they are learning which is law. Every citizen has to learn in the Indonesian language, and it's important for them. So they don't get cheated out of things like that. So they are learning it, and the land they own is which is very important. There are laws that protect land and protect the tribal people. But if you don't know about these laws, then what can you do? So the Fayu land is protected because it belongs to them. So no one can come and take it away. No one can come and just deforest it or anything like that. So that was very important, because the most important aspect of protecting a tribe is protecting the land. Whatever they do, it's up to them. Protect their land. And it's much more effective. That's been my experience.
Okay, so all the time we were talking about what you could teach the tribes, but can they teach us something?
Oh, yes. Human connection. That's something I find through the technology we have here. We are in an incredible fast pace. Like the time here is so fast. It moves. The days go by fast. It's very odd. When you're in the jungle, the time is really slow. If you're not used to it, you go crazy in the beginning because you're not used to it. A day there is like a month here. But one of the main aspects that I noticed is that there's a lot of human connection that they have. And I find here that, maybe in the Czech Republic, it's maybe a bit better, but in a lot of countries, people are so caught up with their phones and this and that, they don't really talk anymore. It's like, like you write it, like our communication is like a WhatsApp message, which is then shortened even in words. And I think what is really important is socializing, is friendship, so important, is taking care of each other, not only physically, but also emotionally. Supporting someone when they're suffering emotionally, when they're sad, being there for them, and accepting people the way they are. So, like, for example, there's no such thing as criticism in tribal culture. People just accept you the way they are. They don't try to push something on you because they think they're right. And I think the human interaction is something we can learn from them, yes.
All right. Well, obviously we could talk hours and hours, but instead I would invite our readers our audience to read some of your books.
Yes.
2 of them, I believe, are in Czech as well. And
2 of them, really? 2. Oh, I wasn't aware of that. So, yes, I have a new book coming out this year. And yes, I've heard that maybe it will be translated into the Czech language also.
Okay, fingers crossed then.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Martin. It was wonderful to be here. And I have to say, I'm really enjoying Prague. Really enjoying it. Love it. Went out partying last night and music and yeah, it's a great city.
Thank you. Tak to byla spisovatelka a dítě džungle Sabine Kueglerová. A za podcast Blesku se loučí Martin Valeš.